Okay. So here with us today is Lara Briden, Dr. Lara Briden, actually. And great to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So Lara is the author of several books, also translated in German. And today we are talking about the Hormone Repair Manual. But
Mhm.
you wrote also other books like the Period Repair Manual and the new one.
Yes.
Yeah, so
On
we
there's a new one on metabolism. Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so this will be actually translated in German, but we talk
Mhm.
about that later. So today
Sure.
the subject is the Hormone Repair Manual.
Mhm.
And well, your books are actually characterized by different things. They are scientifically sound, and at the same time, they are holistic and offer practical solutions, which is very
Mhm.
helpful for people, I think.
Yeah, I wrote it for my patients. I wrote the books for my patients primarily. So I wrote them with women in mind, knowing that women need some, as you say, some practical solutions. They need to know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. So, at the beginning, I just would like shortly mention what our viewers can expect in this interview. So, first of all, they can hear about how relaxing it can be to be in menopause. And yeah, that's something new, I think. And also how maybe they can get through menopause without taking hormones. And if people or women need to take hormones, which ones you recommend? And we will have a look at special symptoms like hot flashes and like mood swings and sleep disturbance and cravings also. Yeah, so there's a lot to
Yeah,
discuss. So
sure.
let's dive in. Um,
Okay, sounds good.
yeah.
Yep.
So at the beginning, I would like to know, so what were your studies in Canada so we can understand why you have this special approach, to treat the symptoms in perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah, I started out as a biologist, and I realize now that some of my understanding and my approach comes from that. So I was an evolutionary biologist. That was my first degree. I actually published a peer-reviewed scientific paper in sex differences in foraging behavior of animals. So from the very beginning, I was thinking about female physiology as adaptive and normal and good. And so then when I then trained as a naturopathic doctor in Canada, so that I don't know if there's not really the equivalent. I'm not sure in Germany, it's quite different, but in North America, there's, a degree in naturopathic medicine, and it's quite similar to it's a postgraduate program. It's quite similar
Yeah.
to medicine. You like study all the, basic medical sciences and then the modalities of nutrition and herbal medicine. And so I did that. And then when I started just practicing and I practiced full time for a long time. I'm no longer full time with patients, but for a long time, I was working as a naturopathic doctor in
Yeah.
general practice in Canada first, in a very rural area where I was treating a lot of farmers and like just people that kind of, I still remember like they intuitively understood when I would say things like, what you eat affects your health. And they're like, of
Yes.
course, like,
Yeah.
because what you feed the animals affects their health. Like it was just like totally logical. Whereas at that time, especially in the 1990s, that was kind of a radical idea that like somehow you could
Yes.
change your diet. You could, by changing your diet, you could change your periods. So yeah, so I did that, and then I moved to Australia in early in 2001, and I had in Sydney, and I had a very busy women's health clinic for a long time, like 15 years, and so with lots of other naturopaths working for me, and so we just saw thousands, like hundreds, thousands of women, and that's how you really learn, of course, is just to
Of course.
see so many cases. And so then from that, I wrote my first book about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so you're really dedicated to this topic of hormones. So how comes
Yes.
that?
Um, I think it started with the women who were coming to see me. That I mean, I was in general practice, but a lot of my patients were women. And especially in the 90s when I started practicing, I mean, to be honest, things aren't that much better now, but like it was tough. There was like their options were surgery or the the birth control pill, kind of higher dose birth control pills, and that's kind of it. Like there wasn't a lot, there
Yeah.
just wasn't a lot else on offer. And so of course women were thinking like they understood that this can't be right. Like there has to be another way to do this. So they came to me and I was very happy to discover that some of the tools I'd been given in my naturopathic training did do work for periods, and so that was a great discovery. And um yeah, that's I think just it grew from there because then I got excited about how well women's bodies respond. Women's physiology is logical and responsive. It's we have this, I think, somewhat of a mainstream view that women's health is just too complicated. It's just like kind of in the too hard basket, if you have that phrase in German. Like it's just put, it's just honestly like the approach is let's just shut it all down with the pill. Like women's hormones are just complicated and we don't really want to deal with this. And but through my lens, no, a monthly menstrual cycle is normal physiology for many animals, not just humans. I mean, this is how female physiology works. So yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I think what is also interesting for our younger viewers is that because you wrote about the menopause, that there are different phases and that it can start earlier than many women think. So I
Yeah.
think that's helpful to know. And I have prepared the chart you
Oh,
have
good.
given
Oh,
me.
yes. Okay. I
Yeah.
shared with you. Yes.
So I will put it on. So
Okay.
okay, so maybe you can explain a little bit
Yeah.
with this chart.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, first I'll just answer what you just explained. Yeah, that the perimenopause transition, and then I'll explain what we're looking at here.
yeah.
The perimenopause transition is when it actually starts when periods are still regular. So it typically starts in a woman's 40s. And not that long ago, when I wrote my perimenopause book, Hormone Repair Manual, there still wasn't much awareness about perimenopause, or I don't know what it's like in Germany, but in Australia, New Zealand, or the United States, like there was still very much this women would sense that something's changing with their hormones and then would go to their doctor and the doctor would say, oh no, menopause isn't until your periods stop. Menopause is in your 50s. And it was just this disconnect between actually most what the science shows is that if a woman's going to have symptoms with perimenopause or
Yeah.
what's also called the menopause transition, most of those symptoms actually start while she's still having periods. So this is very important. So what we're looking at here is people have had a chance to contemplate it here. This is hormones across the lifespan. So you can see across the bottom, I mean, hormones both, that's our estrogen and progesterone, the two main ovarian hormones. They're obviously low in childhood. And then what we're looking at here is estrogen kicks in first. So estrogen is actually quite easy to make. It's the easiest of the two. It's the easiest hormone to make. So teenagers, young teens will have quite a lot of estrogen, but no progesterone yet because we can only make
Mhm.
progesterone with ovulation. I explain that in my books, and it's not easy to ovulate, especially for a young person when she's just first getting her periods going. And so that's why that high estrogen compared to progesterone is why girls that age, like around 13, can get heavy periods sometimes. And I do talk about that in my first book, Period Repair Manual. And then obviously through the reproductive years, hopefully there's a regular natural menstrual cycle where we're making lots of
Yeah.
progesterone. There may be pregnancies in there where we're making lots of progesterone. Progesterone's in orange here. It's not to scale because actually with a menstrual cycle, the peak progesterone, and it's just a fun fact for people, peak progesterone in a healthy menstrual cycle is actually 100 times higher than peak estrogen. They're often represented as kind of being equal size because that's just easier to show on a chart. But there's actually huge, we're supposed to make a huge amount of progesterone. Of course, many women don't make progesterone. If you're on the pill, you don't make progesterone. And there's other
Yeah.
hormonal conditions that can prevent progesterone from being made. One would be polycystic ovary syndrome, for example. And then what we're looking at here, the beauty of this chart is it shows with the onset of perimenopause, the first change is progesterone starts to disappear. You start to have more cycles where you don't ovulate, or you don't have a robust ovulation where you make enough progesterone in the second half of the cycle, but you still make lots of estrogen. In fact, in the early phases of perimenopause, you make higher than normal estrogen. In fact, you can have spikes up to 3 times higher than in your 40s than you did in your 30s. So it's actually some of the symptoms come
Yeah.
from high estrogen, high, not low. And then, but of course, the higher estrogen goes, it then has to drop down with every menstrual cycle. This is all just schematically shown here. Obviously, we don't
Yes.
have enough space on this chart to show every menstrual cycle. But the thing about estrogen, some people don't kind of realize maybe, but it's normal in a menstrual cycle for estrogen to drop down to menopausal levels during the period, like during the bleed. Young women do that as well. In fact, estrogen will go even younger or even lower in young
Yeah.
women than in perimenopausal women. It's normal for it to drop down, but if it's been spiking up to 3 times higher and then dropping down to the normal low levels, that steep
Yeah.
drop in estrogen can create symptoms. It's
Yeah.
very unpleasant symptoms. And then eventually, obviously, as the periods become farther apart, and then eventually, when you have no periods, then estrogen does drop, not to zero. It drops to about 10% of what we make. And actually, it still fluctuates a bit in the early years after the periods stop. So, this chart, it should have a citation on here. I try to usually give the citation. This chart was developed originally, it appeared in a scientific paper by Professor Geraldine Pryor, who's a reproductive endocrinologist. She's a scientist. Some of your viewers may know of her.
Yeah.
I talk about her in my books quite a lot. She and I wrote a paper together. So she's just she's a champion of women's health. She's a superstar in women's health. She's published like 200 papers, a lot of them on
Oh, okay.
progesterone scientific
Yeah.
papers. Yeah. And this is her chart, but
Yeah.
I modified it. I kind of made it a little prettier for my perimenopause book. And this has been a very popular chart because it is good to see what's actually happening there, that the high estrogen compared to progesterone during the perimenopausal years while periods are still happening. In fact, arguably, the onset of perimenopause is defined by when progesterone starts to drop away. And we can talk about how you can know if that's what's happening. I mean,
Yeah.
how many of your listeners, Emily, are charting their cycles, do you think? Is that a common thing with
Well, I don't know actually. I'm
okay.
not sure. Yeah. So
By
I
charting, I mean with temperatures. There'll be some people
Oh, with
listening because the
temperature, I don't think a lot. That's still not
okay.
common here. Yeah, because if you take the pill, for example, or then women don't do it. It's
Right. Well,
just if they have it as contraceptive method.
okay, so to be clear, on the pill, none of that's what we just looked at. None of that's happens.
Yes.
So on the pill, on most types, not they've it varies a little bit type to type of hormonal birth control, but most types of hormonal birth control, including the main estrogen pill, birth control pill, contraceptive pill, switches off estrogen and progesterone. Like, so if you were to measure with a blood test while on the pill, if you were to do a blood test for those
Yes.
two hormones we were just looking at, estradiol and progesterone, you would have none. So instead, you have, and this is a whole other topic, right? But instead, you have the medications, the synthetic estrogen and the progestin, but they're not the same molecules. They're not the same hormones. That's why they don't show up on a blood test, obviously. And then, of course, they also have the medications have quite different effects in the body compared to real hormones.
Yeah.
So
I think
yeah, so
that's
for and then
important actually that you
yeah,
mentioned that because if it's not the same, because I think a lot of women think that progestogen, like in the contraceptive pill,
yeah,
and progesterone in the body is the same, but actually it's not. It has totally different
it's
effects, right?
really not. And I can so I'll explain that a little bit more because
Please,
it's
please.
actually quite an important part of the story. And I think for a long time, yes, there's been this sort of from medicine, I guess, from science, this sort of wishful thinking that they are the same thing, but it was very much wishful thinking. It was quite the word I would use is reckless. I don't know what the word in German is, but like it's been a little reckless with
Yes.
3 or 4 generations of women to switch off their ovarian hormones, which, to be clear, we need for general health and not just to make a baby. Like we, just like men benefit from testosterone, women benefit from estradiol and progesterone, our ovarian hormones. They're important for the brain, for the immune system, for the heart health, for bones, um, yeah, for mood, for yeah, just lots of things for breast health potentially, because progesterone. One thing that Professor Pryor, who I mentioned earlier, she's written about quite a lot, including a couple of scientific papers. Our body's own progesterone that we make with each, hopefully, if we're ovulating and having a natural cycle, we make a dose, 2 weeks of it every month. But also, we make a huge, like just astronomical amount of progesterone with pregnancy, like just a like giant amount of progesterone. And arguably, there's several reasons or several lines of evidence to suggest that progesterone probably reduces the risk of breast cancer, whereas all progestins slightly increase the risk of breast cancer. So
Yeah.
that's one stark difference. Another very stark difference is that progesterone, our own progesterone that we make or that we can take, you can take natural progesterone or oral micronized progesterone. It's probably called Prometrium in Germany. So I mean, it's available as a medication, the natural hormone, but um, real progesterone, whether it's that the body makes or that you take as a medication, metabolizes in the body to something called, well, without getting too scientific, it's a neurosteroid, which means it's like a neurotransmitter, but it's a hormone. It's a
Yeah.
very famous one called allopregnanolone. People don't have to know the name, but it comes from progesterone, and the brain loves it. Like it's so important for the brain. In fact, to the point that some scientists have done research into using progesterone and allopregnanolone for healing traumatic brain injury. So it's clearly very important for the brain and nervous system. No progestin converts to allopregnanolone. So there's another stark difference. You see what I mean by this has been rather reckless, wishful thinking to somehow think that it's fine. We can switch off women's progesterone and give them this other molecule and it's going to be fine. And so this is why we're now seeing, like, for example, there's the research showing that women who take hormonal birth control have different brain structures compared to women who cycle naturally. Makes sense when you think about what I've just talked about, like how the hormones, not just progesterone,
Definitely.
actually, estrogen affects the brain as well. And also bone health. So we know that um, some research that Geraldine Pryor again has pointed me to. I think some of it she's done herself. We do know it's quite concerning that teenagers who take hormonal birth control, especially the pill, do not achieve what's called peak bone density or peak bone mass. So teenagers are supposed to be building their bone, getting stronger and stronger bones until around 25. That's called our peak bone density. That's the strongest bones we're ever going to have. And then from that point, it's all downhill. Our bones from about 25, our bones start becoming weaker and weaker. I mean, obviously it's enough for most of us that we're going to get through to 80 into our 80s and 90s, and it's fine, especially if you've had a healthy life. It's slow and gradual, but it's concerning if young girls are not, because they're on the pill, if they're not getting there, what's that going to mean when they're 80? That, so we don't
Yes.
even have that data because like it hasn't even been the pill hasn't even been around that long. But even when it was first invented, it wasn't given to 12-year-olds back then. Like when it was first invented, it was given to like 30-year-olds. It was like for a while, like between pregnancies kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, obviously I know our podcast is mainly about perimenopause, so we should try to get back to that. But like
Yeah.
this is one of my main, this is one of my
Yeah.
main things that I've written about and talked about is in
Yeah.
many ways just kind of how outrageous it is that we've had
Yeah.
decades of routine use of these medications that switch off women's physiology.
Yeah, and I think really that it's important that you mention it because we also have younger women who listen to that and
Yeah.
maybe they can change again still things, now before taking the pill for decades. I mean,
A lot of young women, I don't know, I'd be curious what you're seeing in Germany. A lot of young women are saying no to the pill. Like it's finally happening. Like there's definitely a bit of a revolution going on. I think some of them are, to be fair, some of them are choosing hormonal IUDs,
Yes.
which I will just point out are a little different in that hormonal IUDs, depending on the IUD and the dose and the age of the
Yeah.
woman and all sorts of things, they can permit ovulation. So you can make ovarian hormones on an IUD. It doesn't shut it all down the way the pill does. So that's good. It doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong. Like the the
Yeah.
IUD still contains a progestin, and that progestin still, we know now from the research that progestin still reaches the brain and the breasts
Yeah.
and the skin. Like the progestin in IUDs and in a lot of pills actually is a, a molecule called levonorgestrel, which is derived from testosterone. It's made from testosterone. It's quite testosterone like, which is why it can cause skin breakouts, facial hair, weight gain around the middle. That's classic with kind of a testosterone
Yeah.
type hormone in the female body. Yeah.